Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to talk about what happened yesterday with regards to Whoopi Goldberg's suspension off of the television show, the ABC television show, The View, for 2 weeks. But what I really think about her comments with regards to the Holocaust and how she assessed this historical situation through her modern lens. First of all, the ladies on the View were discussing the banning of this graphic novel. This Hey Lisa, what's going on? Basically, this comic book called Mouse. It is by a graphic novel artist named Art Spiegelman, uh, um, based on an interview of his grandfather who lived in Regal Park, Queens, on his experience in an Auschwitz, a Polish concentration camp called Auschwitz, possibly the most famous concentration camp during World War II. There's a lot of different concentration camps, but most of the time, pressed on the street, if you were to ask anybody, just a normal person that's not a student of World War II history or a student of Jewish history or just an average everyday Joe or Jane, ask him name one concentration camp that existed during World War II. Auschwitz would be the one. So anyway, this World War II school board is, this Tennessee school board is deciding to ban this World War II piece of literature on the basis that the graphic novel contains nudity, contains um, strong language, cursing, um, some acts of violence, though I don't know what act of violence could be more egregious than what the characters in the graphic novel were doing. The Nazis killing 6 million people. But they were discussing this and they were trying to lay the blame on the other ladies on racism and xenophobia and trying to, I guess, get at, of course, the majority Republican school board, not for fascism and not for their overly conservatism and overly prudishness, but they were trying to say that them banning this graphic novel was a form of racism. To which Whoopi Goldberg chimed in that, in her opinion, the Holocaust was not about racism, but was two groups of white people. One group of white people, the Germans, fighting against and oppressing another group of white people, the Jews, and it was more about man's inhumanity to man. And because of this, ABC responded by suspending Whoopi Goldberg. Now, in response to this, I see a lot of disingenuousness among the commentators that are giving their opinion. And what I mean by this is they are intentionally lying. We know that in our modern world, and even back then, let's not front, let's not act like it wasn't true. People saw Jewish people, especially Ashkenazi Jewish people of European extraction, as white. So Whoopi Goldberg's assessment of the situation, in my opinion, was true. We do see Jewish people, especially Ashkenazi Jews, as another group of white people. And of course, Germans saw it that way before the Nazis. Now, the other side of it. It is true that the Nazis enacted certain laws, like the Nuremberg laws, on the basis of race. And they saw the Jewish people as a separate race, quote unquote, as themselves. But is it really like that? Or was that just a crazy theory among the other crazy theories that the Nazis came up with? We're not actually taking our cues from the Nazis now, are we? I think a better argument would have been made if the ladies on The View would have said, you know what? This is an example of Republican authoritarianism. It's an example of Republican fascism and, of course, Republican prudishness. The reason why Art Spiegel wrote this novel was in order, he wrote it in 1991. It was in order to get across to a modern audience, to a younger audience that's more edgy, more controversial, the ideas expressed in this, in hopes that they never forget about the atrocities that happened. But about Whoopi Goldberg's comment, she's absolutely right. We do look at the Jewish people as another group of white people. And she is also absolutely right that race is visual in our country. If we can't see a racial difference between another group of people, then more than likely they won't be affected by racism, even if they are a religious minority like the Jews. And also, let's not forget that Judaism in the United States, not in Nazi Germany, but in the United States in which we live, in which Whoopi Goldberg made the comment, Jews are a religion that can be of any race. You have Middle Eastern Jews, you have Sephardic Jews who are Hispanic, you have Ashkenazi Jews, which are the majority of Jews, you have Ethiopian Jews, which are black people. So the Jewish person can be of any type of racial extraction. But the Jews in reference here, in the historical moment here, are Ashkenazi Jews, European Jews, not Jews of color. I'm getting around to that. At least. Now, the hypocrisy on the part of ABC with regards to this, they, on several occasions, did not ban Meghan McCain from ABC. And when Meghan McCain was on The View, she would make controversial statements such as co-signing Donald Trump's comments about COVID. And during 2019, she said that she was mourning the fact that she could no longer make anti-Islamic remarks about Ilhan Omar and Islamophobic remarks about Ilhan Omar because of the environment that Trump had created with his racism. So basically, what she was saying was she was mad that Trump, and a lot of Republicans were mad about this, that Trump pulled the mask off of the racism of the Republican Party, and the Republicans could no longer duplicitly pretend that they were for minority rights while at the same time actually being against them. So basically, oh, we can't front no more. We can't try to act like we're all for equality anymore because Trump has come out and he's been explicitly racist. He's been blatantly racist. So how you gonna be mad that because the dude done basically took your mask off? He done did you like Shaggy and the gang used to do the criminals at the end of Scooby Doo. At the end of Scooby Doo, Shaggy and used to take off the mask of the criminals, then what would the criminals automatically say? They'd be like, I would have got away with it if it weren't for these damn kids, right? So, so basically, Meghan McCain was upset and she was saying, damn, we would have got away with this Islamophobia, which, by the way, Islam is a religion as well, but they always want to class as a race. If it wasn't for Donald Trump coming out with his blatant Islamophobia like the Muslim ban. So she has said racial comments before as well. But again, when a white person says something like this, like Meghan McCain, they are not banned from The View. They are not taken off of The View. There are several other white commentators on TV that say the exact same thing. And okay, let's not pretend that the majority of anti-Semitic attacks that occur against the Jewish people in the United States here are done by far-right extremists and people who are white. You know what I mean? Let's not try to make Whoopi Goldberg, who has worked with Jewish people her whole life and whose stage name is in fact Jewish, the face of anti-Semitism just because she said something that we were all thinking. You know, we all know we don't equate in our modern sensibilities anti-Semitism with racism. It is a completely different phenomenon, and they shouldn't be compared. Like so, saying well, one is worse, one is better than the other. There are completely two different things that exist on two different wavelengths. Whoopi Goldberg is exactly right when she says that it is clearly not the same thing. And if you think it is the same thing, you are either dumb or you are a Nazi yourself. Yeah, that's completely different. The comments are completely. And I hate how Republicans come to the defense of free speech, yet they want to ban books. That should have been the thing that they harp on, not because of the racism, not trying to equate anti Semitism with racism, but they're always coming out here, especially during the 2016 election, they were always coming out here and trying to say, oh, I'm for free speech, I'm for saying what I feel, you know, First Amendment rights, but it's always like First Amendment rights for me, but not for thee. I'm only for First Amendment rights, they claim, and they're always against the SJWs, quote unquote, who want to restrict your freedom. Yeah, yeah, big dog, the Shane McMahon thing. But a lot of people are for restricting rights when somebody says something that they don't agree with, or a book is too quote unquote graphic, but it's a freaking graphic novel. You know, you know what I mean? What's up, big dog? But yeah, it's a graphic novel. It's not. I mean, put it out there. Let the material be known. Let Whoopi Goldberg express her opinion, and in fact, a fact, not an opinion, a fact. First of all, they want to obfuscate and say that racism don't exist, but at the same time, they want to use racism as a battering ram against their political opponents. That makes them no better than the left. They don't bring up the Sharon Osbourne thing, as Lisa has mentioned, and they don't bring up the other things that Meghan McCain has said on the show, but they want to get at Whoopi. I think because Whoopi is a famous person. Whoopi is well known. Whoopi has notoriety and doesn't have the protection of, right, exactly, of despotism, if you will, of that familial relation that Meghan McCain has connected to somebody in the political establishment. Kind of like what Big Dog is referencing with Shane McMahon, where we know Shane McMahon was let go from the WWE, but he's still Vince McMahon's son, and he can still come back anytime, unlike those employees that were let off from COVID, during the COVID pandemic in 2020. But what Lisa's saying, if someone fills out on the census, what do they fill out? Under the race section, Jewish is now one of the options. Absolutely, because Judaism is a multi-ethnic religion, at least. It's not something that just it only affects one race of people. So it isn't a racial issue, even though the Nazis tried to racialize it. They tried to make it a racial issue with their laws, but of course, Nazis had all kinds of crazy beliefs that were nonsense. If we're going to go by them, then that's even crazier. You know what I mean? That's subscribing to a Nazi ideology. We're not actually going to go on the basis of them when commenting. I think a lot of people are trying to flip it around, trying to say that Whoopi Goldberg, is minimizing what happened in the Holocaust. But if you listen closely to what she actually said and try to react with logic and not emotion, you can kind of glean what she was trying to say. The problem is with people, they only hear one little part of a clip. We live in a clip based society where people have short attention spans. So they hear a clip or they see a posting online on Facebook and they automatically read into that and they're ready to make reaction videos and ready to make videos or comments about it without actually listening to what the person has to say. There are several genocides, not just the Holocaust, that although horrific, were not about race. I mean, I wouldn't sit there and say that the Rwandan genocide was about race, right? Because they were both, the Tutsis and the Hutus were both um, two different tribes of African black people that were killing each other. So even that, had she said that it wasn't about race, she would have been right as well. Just like with this comparison, I don't think the Armenian genocide was about race because the race was not brought up as a reason that Armenians were extinguished. And you got to also remember, or attempted to be extinguished, you got to also remember that what one society perceives as a racial group is not what another society might perceive as a racial group. And what I mean by that is, in some societies, tribal affiliations are considered as racial groups. In some societies, national affiliations are considered as racial groups. In other societies, religious affiliations are considered as racial categories and groups. For example, in our society here in the West, we wouldn't know or consider the differences between, say, the Igbo people and the Hausa people that are both Nigerians. We would say, well, they're both Nigerians. They're both part of the Nigerian national culture and part of the Nigerian society. But in Nigerian culture, uh, this distinguishedness and the distinguished difference between the Hausa people. She, of course, big dog. Of course, she backtracked. You know what I mean? Because we are. Let's just keep it 100%. We keep it 100% on this channel. I'm pretty sure ABC and their other Disney affiliates are all run by Jewish people, and they would have been offended by it. Yet, and still, if you were to go up to them one of them in the 1940s and say, "Well, you're a different race," they would have automatically been offended by that. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say, for example, you are a different race, and then when it's convenient for you, you say you are a different race. Either you are a different race or you're not a different race. You can't play both sides of the fence. But of course, he apologized, Big Dog, because the organization is probably run by Jewish people of European extraction, and she backtracked. Isn't that how it always happens when somebody says something offensive? Oh, they're like, "Oh, I apologize," right? But no. If you said it, you meant it, stick by it, and don't backtrack. But she did it, of course, for her job, right? But she said something that we all were thinking. She said something that we all pretty much agree on. When issues about World War II and how the Jews were treated um, are almost never equated to on an equal level to what went on here in the United States or South Africa or other countries to deal with race. And listen and look at this, just like the example of Nigeria, right? The Hausa versus the Igbo. We don't look at that as a racial conflict. We don't even look, most times, most academics don't even look at the Israeli Palestinian issue as a racial issue. And to look at that as a racial issue in the same lens we look at, say, black South Africans or versus white South Africans is it's not the same thing. Yeah, she doubled down, Lisa, you're right. Because again, and this is a point she brought up now, whether or not you think Whoopi Goldberg is an intellectual giant or not, or she is qualified, whatever the hell that means, to comment on an issue like this, she's absolutely right, though. And here's another reason why she is right. During World War II, they had to put yellow patches on some of the Jewish people. Now, if the racial differences were automatically evident, as she as her the haters against her, the detractors against her claim they are, why would they have to put those yellow patches on them? You know, they're automatically evident. You can see it with your eyes, right? But you couldn't. That's the thing. There was no big racial difference between them. They were invented races, right? They're not the part of the discrimination that they were creating, the difference between the Aryans, quote unquote, and the Jewish people were part of Nazi propaganda. Again, we're not going to use Nazi propaganda to dictate how we speak in our society. If you buy into that, then you're automatically buying into the Nazi propaganda that there are racial differences between Jews and non-Jews. Now, some will say, well, that buys into the biblical belief, and that buys into some of the propagation of Judaism itself. There are racial, quote unquote, differences between Jews and non-Jews. I don't know. But by them saying that, that's the ironic part. They're buying into, or they're buying into Hitler's ideology, and the ideology of the neo Nazis. By them actually coming out and saying, yeah, there is a difference between racially between Jews and non-Jews. Actually, that's something that Hitler would have agreed with. That's the ironic part. But how many people think that if somebody else had said this, if Meghan McCain had said this, or even Joy Behar had said it wouldn't have been such an issue because, again, a lot of these Jewish executives and stuff, they come out and they automatically say, oh, there's no difference between us and other Caucasian people, other white people. But then in the same breath, when it's convenient for them, they will say, oh, there is a difference between them. You know, you can't have your cake, you can't have it both ways. Either there is a difference between y'all, or y'all just one of the many other ethnic groups of white folks. I think it is both ways. Historically, in Europe, Jewish people were looked at as a different group of people than other non Jewish white people. But that doesn't mean, right? She said thing about the stars, Lisa. That doesn't mean that the people that were oppressing the Jewish people were were right on what they were saying. They were wrong on what they were saying. So like you know what I mean? If you're gonna cast uh them as a separate group of people, as a separate race of people, as it were, then you're actually buying into Nazi and anti-Semitic propaganda over the centuries. But of course, we know why Whoopi Goldberg was fired because most of the executives uh, are Jewish people. So even though she big dog, even though she backdoored it, she didn't stick by her words. Of course she didn't because she got heat for it. Okay, so yeah, that's my opinion on it in the end. And if Whoopi was absolutely right. She said what we all were thinking. It's not a racial issue. They should have focused more on the book banning, more on that aspect of fascism, that aspect of authoritarianism, and castigated against that than talking about this racial issue because racial standards in Nazi Germany were different and racial perceptions of Nazi Germany were different than what we perceive as race. And I say perceive because in reality, there is no difference between human beings on the basis of race. Race is completely arbitrary. Race is a category invented here in the United States and in other places to separate human beings. There is ethnic heritage, there is heritages among human beings, even of the same quote unquote race, which Whoopi was referring to as visible. There are differences among Asians, there are differences among Africans, there are differences among so called Hispanics, so called Jewish people. Every single race and category of group has differences among them, both visual and non visual. And sometimes these differences are made to create and divide people, and sometimes they are called race. But every society and every construct is different. In our society, our construct in which Whoopi was speaking, race was one thing, race is one thing and perceived as one thing, mostly a black and a white issue or a white and an Asian issue, and in Nazi Germany something different. Yeah, well, they don't want to take chance. Be the executive lease, but don't forget that Disney is run. Disney is the owner of of ABC, the parent company of ABC, and they actually run ABC. So, with that being said, even though the black lady is the executive, who's running her, who's in charge of her, and this is not to appeal to an anti-Semitic trope. That's what I know people are going to come up with. They're going to say, "Oh, well, you're appealing to an anti-Semitic trope that all Jewish people are in charge of the media." It's not a trope. It's true. You, you know what I mean? Um, in this country, because of anti-Semitism here in the United States, a lot of the jobs that were offered to a lot of the yeah, right. Big Dog says, "How funny would it be if um, Rosie O'Donnell returns to the View?" Yeah, that would be funny. But a lot of the jobs that a lot of these Jewish immigrants in the early 1900s or 1910s or 1920s got was founding these multimedia organizations. So there are a lot of Jewish people that are heads of these old multi-million dollar corporations, such as Disney. How ironic, because a lot of people say that Walt Disney himself was anti-Semitic, but we know Bob Iger was the head of Disney, right? I mean, this is unfortunately become an anti-Semitic stereotype, an anti-Semitic trope, but it's kind of true. You know what I mean? So even though there's a black lady in the head of it, at least it might actually it's probably um it's probably true. You know what I mean? So a lot of these sensitive stuff you can't really say, even if you know it to be true, that it could be perceived or could be spun as anti-Semitic. You know, it all depends on the narrative. It all depends on how you spin it. Certain shit could be perceived as anti, Hispanic. When you say certain shit and it's not true. And if you're on television or you're on Univision, you might not want to. Right. Big Dog saying that in his job there was a guy he didn't like. Whoopi Goldberg and Rosie O'Donnell didn't like each other because they're both very opinionated. A lot of times the things they say they don't know what they're talking about because again, what the problem with the View I think is um, it's people who are not educated in these fields saying things that are their opinions, just like you're on YouTube. It might you might think my videos are all bullshit, right? You might think, oh well, he don't know what he's really talking about. He's never studied critical race theory or any of these other types of theories that have to do with race, but yet he's commenting. But that's the thing. Opinions are like opinions are like assholes. Everyone has them, and most of the time they stink. You know what I mean? So just because Whoopi has an opinion on something, that a lot of people share, they're afraid to speak it out. Thank you, Big Dog. Thank you. I hope we get there someday. Just because she has an opinion and she speaks it out doesn't mean she should be canceled. See, that's the problem. Again, people backtrack. Uh, people say, well, there's no such thing as cancel culture. But when somebody says something, even if it is a little off color, and even if it's something that we all thinking, she's not saying she's not saying that anything against the Jewish people. As a matter of fact, I think what she was trying to say was trying to de-racialize the issue and trying to make the issue more about a humanitarian thing than a racial issue. She was trying to say that it's about man's inhumanity to man. She wasn't trying to make it a racial issue. But ironically enough, Republicans became the snowflakes in this thing, and they tried to make it a racial issue. And that's the problem with soundbite culture and clip culture is they'll take a little snippet of something you said and completely take it out of context and not look at the things you said before or after it and try to make you something you're not. Oh, right. Lisa is absolutely right. They call it the view, but you can't have your own view. You know, like, yeah, these women are not academic experts. A lot of times, academic experts are not the best people to talk about these specific issues because they're so lost in they're so lost in their worlds of academia, they ain't talking to nobody but other books. You know, they're the equivalent. A lot of these academics and these political commentators like Ben Shapiro, big surprise, Ben Shapiro, who says that race is not a big issue in this country, that racism doesn't even exist in this country, and tries to cover up um, real acts of racial injustice, considers this the biggest act of racial injustice that he's ever heard of, even though this was harmless, to be honest with you. The comments that she made, it was harmless comments. You know what I mean? Like, this wasn't a huge issue. I mean, really, this was not like, I mean, I've heard worse than this out of other commentators, even other comics. But they take a little piece of what you said, take it out of context, blow it out of proportion, and try to make you the bad guy. And they're accusing Democrats of doing this and the left of doing this. And they say the left is guilty of cancel culture, which they are. But the right does the exact same thing when they feel they have the upper hand. When they feel they can use either anti-Asian racism or anti-Semitism as a battering ram against somebody on the left, they'll try to do that too. So they engage in the same exact tactics as people on the right do, but then they get mad. I mean, as people on the left do, but then they get mad at people on the left when people on the left do that. They say, oh, you're only using sound bites and you're taking the stuff that Trump is saying or other right-wing commentators are saying out of context, yet they do the exact same thing when they feel like it serves their purpose, right? It's the equivalent of Vince McMahon, you know, getting on WCW and Eric Bischoff for trying to put him out of business with unfair business practices while he was doing the exact same thing to other territories, neighboring Ghana in the 1980s. You know, you're trying to get on me, you're trying to castigate me for using sound bites and using cancel culture, but here you are using or trying to use cancel culture on Whoopi Goldberg. You know, it's either fair game or it's not. Everybody can either have their own viewpoints or not have their own viewpoints. Either we can express ourselves freely and we're all for free speech and people can say whatever the hell they want and deal with the consequences later, or there's no such thing as free speech and we just throw the whole First Amendment out of the window. Okay, he's saying, and not even a clip. A lot of people watching yeah, they felt you shouldn't even have an opinion on it, which is crazy because um the Republicans, the ones that are getting against her, even people like Ben Shapiro, defended actual neo Nazis in the world. Right, exactly. Big Dog said, like when Fox News used to criticize CNN for um, criticizing Trump, yet they do the exact same thing to Joe Biden. How much of the coverage against President Biden has been that he is feeble minded, is old, that he is slow to speak, that he I mean, Joe Rogan has even suggested that he's on drugs, right? Or that he's demented, or that he is ill equipped for his job. The things that the quote unquote respect for the office that they used to say that the left wing media, the biased left wing media, doesn't have for the office of president, they no longer have. They feel like they can say whatever about the president, that he is feeble minded, that he is old, that he's falling asleep, right? Showing pictures of him falling asleep, trying to suggest that he has narcolepsy or some shit. In the same way that people on the left criticize President Trump for being old, feeble minded, and absent minded and not know what the hell he's talking about. Well, the left and the right do the exact same thing, but you'll notice that one does it when they're in power and the other does it when they're in power. They use the exact same tactics, but the way they interpret it is different. But to Lisa's point, that because Whoopi's a black woman, they felt that she shouldn't speak on this. Yeah, because again, Megan McCain has said certain shit like this before, and she was never fired. You know, racist stuff on The View has been coming out of the women of The View since The View started. You know what I mean? I mean, Elizabeth Hasselbeck suggested that we should be bombing brown people in the Middle East. She supported the war in Iraq. Now it's funny because all the Republicans now are anti-neocon and against the war in Iraq. They're looking back on it in retrospect and they're against the war in Iraq. But when the shit was blazing on, they used to criticize all people, left or right, as anti-American if they were against the war in Iraq. See how viewpoints can change? Maybe in those days in Nazi Germany and in Europe as a whole, European history, people thought of Jewish people as non white. And they did interpret it through the lens of a racial issue. But Whoopi Goldberg is saying in modern American society, we no longer see it that way. We don't see it through a racial lens because the people that attack Jewish people don't do it for a racial reason. And if they do it for a racial reason, like if they're neo Nazis, like the ones that the pro Republican Trump, the pro Trump Republicans defend, like the neo Nazis that invaded the Capitol. If they are like that, if there are neo Nazis and they do see Jewish people as a separate racial group, then it's the Republicans that are defending them. It's not Whoopi Goldberg defending Nazis. Like, I'm surprised that wasn't the headline. Whoopi Goldberg defends Nazis. Come on. It's sort of like with the WWE thing, the renaming of Volta as Gunther, like, do you really think that the writers of NXT 2.0, even though stupid, really, right, really um, wanted to name a wrestler after a neo-Nazi U-boat captain? No, they did it as a joke. They did it as a lark. But typically, like I said with the media, they blow things out of proportion. Lisa saying some people say Whoopi Goldberg considers herself Jewish. What do I think about that? That goes back to what I said in the beginning of the video, Lisa, that she has an affinity towards the Jewish people. She's worked with several Jewish comedians. And going back to what I said, that because of anti Semitism in the 1920s and 30s, when Hollywood and these entertainment outlets were established, a lot of Jewish people got jobs in them. Most of the founders of the major Hollywood studios um, were liberal socialist Jews, something that Ben Shapiro himself even says and confirms in his book Primetime Propaganda. And then he wants to act like that's not true, that that's offensive, what is being said. Yet he himself says that all the time. If you were to sit there and say that media is controlled primarily by Ashkenazi Jews, he would say that, oh, you're appealing to an anti-Semitic trope. Yet he himself says that in his book. He himself admits that most of these Jewish immigrants that were coming over in the early 1900s were Jews, and they founded these major media conglomerate studios, and they still run them to this day. Yeah, I don't think he fired his own son, Big Dog. No, I don't. I think he just let him go because the men's Royal Rumble was badly booked. You know, it was horribly booked, and he put himself in like the final three, him and Bad Bunny. But again, trying to appeal to a certain demographic with the Bad Bunny thing, trying to appeal to the Latino demographic and get them in. No surprise there. But again, going back to this Whoopi Goldberg situation, Whoopi Goldberg was unjustly suspended, and she was suspended for because ABC wants to save face. ABC wants to not appear anti-Semitic, even though nothing that Whoopi Goldberg said in her commentary here was anti-Semitic. In fact, saying that Jewish people are not a separate race of people and that it wasn't a racial conflict is anti-Semitic. If she would have said, yeah, they are a separate race of people, that would have appealed more to Hitler's ideology. That was what Hitler was trying to say. That was the point of the Nazi regime, trying to get that across. The Jewish activists were trying to fight for integration and trying to fight for the right to say that they were exactly like everybody else in German society. In fact, most of them were assimilationist in German society and thought of themselves more as German, more akin to the German Gentiles than they did to their Eastern European and especially Middle Eastern brethren. They were fully integrated into the society. They wanted to be a part of German society, and when Hitler came along, they were no longer permitted to do that. A demarcation was put between themselves and other Germans. I mean, anybody that has studied the history of Nazi ascension to political power would know that the ones who made it a racial issue, the ones who racialized it, the ones who made Jewish people a separate racial group, Nazis. So by Republicans coming out and beating Whoopi Goldberg up again, they are agreeing with the Nazi ideology. How ironic. But of course, most of the alt right and most of the people, even on the mainstream right, agree with the Nazis implicitly if they don't explicitly. They say they don't because they support Zionism. Oh, we support Zionism. But don't they know that in England and other, especially in England, most of the ardent um, pro Zionist people were actually anti Semitic people. Their logic was that we'd rather have them over there than have them here. I mean, T.E. Lawrence, even Benjamin Disraeli was Jewish, but most of these were anti Semites. You know, a lot of these early pro Zionist Christians were anti Semites. You know, they didn't want the Jewish people in English society or in American society, so they said, yeah, big dog, no doubt. So they said, so they said, well, let's just build a settlement for them over there in the Middle East and keep them over there in the Middle East rather than have them coming over here to um, to Western Europe. And that's still the logic to this day, big dog. But again, if you're the daughter of a famous politician, a famous Republican politician like Meghan McCain, you could coast by on it when it comes to that because of despotism, just like being the son of a famous wrestling promoter could get you to coast by on booking one of the weakest Royal Rumbles in Royal Rumble history. Lisa says her mom even agreed that they shouldn't have suspended Whoopi, but they did it to save face, Lisa. They did it because they felt they had to. They felt obligated to do so just because they want to avoid the media backlash because they know that the Republican Party are just as big as snowflakes as the Democrats. But a lot of times Republicans don't get these platforms because media companies are predominantly liberal when they feel like they need to be. Unless it comes to money or economics, then they feel like they need to they need to be conservatives and support corporations. I try to be. At least I don't always get everything right. I don't, especially on these lives. I try to remember as much as I possibly. Yeah, you can get away with it, especially when you can when you have the connections, you can get away with anything. It's who you know, not so much what you know in this world, unfortunately, that we deal with. There is so much nepotism and despotism in the world. Because yes, media corporations and wrestling promoters and stuff are all despots. How many times have we seen something like this go on where media companies feel like they had to pull back? Oh, we got to pull back now because we're getting a lot of backlash. We're getting a lot of shit. We're getting a lot of heat rather than just roll with it. Even we've seen it in the WWE before, even in wrestling companies that weren't even the WWE. Remember when Uncensored 96, somebody was called the final solution. And it was supposed to be the final solution to the end of Hulkamania, but it ended up being the final solution to supposedly alluding to anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, right? So people have always had to felt like they had to pull back when it comes to things like this. You know, even though they put something out. Oops, we shouldn't have said that. So they feel like again they have to pull back because of sponsors or sensitivity uh, when it comes to things like that. Even though the word final solution and the phrase final solution existed before the Nazis and doesn't directly correlate to the Nazis either. But again, how it was perceived, pulled from Vince McMahon himself, perception is reality. So if they perceive you to be anti-Semitic, then you are anti-Semitic, even if your words are taken out of context and you really weren't. You know what I mean? So, like what happened with this case, Whoopi Goldberg. Come on, you're gonna really believe that Whoopi Goldberg is anti-Semitic when her last name is Goldberg and she got her start working with Billy Crystal and working with Robin Williams, although not Jewish, had a lot of Jewish references in his comedy, had a lot of Jewish characters in his comedy, Yiddish based characters. A lot of his characters appealed to fans of Yiddish theater. A lot of comedy in and of itself has Jewish, American comedy has Jewish roots. Jerry Seinfeld and others, luminaries in the comedic world are all Jewish. Come on, Whoopi Goldberg, who was an old school student of the game when it comes to comedy, is not anti-Semitic. She's as anti-Semitic as John Cena is anti-Chinese, and we all know that, we all know that not to be true. Why would she? Why would Karen Johnson, who was just Whoopi Goldberg's real name herself Whoopi Goldberg if she didn't have respect and love for the Jewish people? Come on, she's not in. You're gonna try to really try to paint Whoopi Goldberg, a black woman with a Jewish last name, as a Nazi? Yeah, big dog. But she was doing stand up comedy long before that. A lot of people were introduced to her when it came to Ghost because that's when she first came you know, won an Oscar. And she was good in that, but she really has her roots in comedy. You know what I mean? If you say the word Goldberg, either you're gonna think about Goldberg the wrestler, Goldberg from the Mighty Ducks, or her. You know, maybe Goldberg the TV show, but that's more modern. Yeah, maybe so. Lisa said they figured everyone else got in trouble over the years for something. See, Joy Behar wouldn't have walked back from it. That's what I respect about Joy. She never walked back from her comments. I don't respect people. I can't say I respect Whoopi's stance. I understand why she did it. She did it for business reasons. But I feel like when you make a statement, and you know I always say this, guys, on my channel, when you make a statement, you never recant from that statement. You stand by that statement. That's why people respect Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle has said some shit that could be considered or be misconstrued as homophobic or transphobic in some of his comedy specials, but he sticks by it. He's like, you know what? Fuck it, I said it, and that's the way it is. That's the way it's gonna remain. Never walk back, guys, on your statements. Stick by what you say and stand by what you say. Always be open for suggestions and always be open for the possibility that you could be wrong. You know what I mean? Because a lot of times, no matter how good we are, no matter how good our recollections are, and how good our memories are, we forget things. We in the presentation of narratives, sometimes things could be forgotten, dates could be mixed up, names could be mixed up, places could be mixed up, and sometimes you could be wrong because because we're open for suggestions. Even Nick Cannon said what he said, and he was open for suggestions. He was open to dialogue with a rabbi to try to understand the Jewish perspective and the Jewish viewpoint of history, which through most of but he didn't denounce what he said. Through most of Western history, if you look at the history of Western Europe and the history of Western culture, it has been Jewish people have been the outsiders, they have been the downtrodden, and they have been victims of anti-Semitism throughout the centuries in Western Europe and other Western countries, and even going back as far as the Bible, if you want to take it that far back to the Babylonian days, the Persian days, whatever, right? We know about the Spanish Inquisition. We know about pogroms in Russia and Eastern Europe, right? All that is known. There's a video on my channel about um, the Ottoman Empire, in which I said that even though Jewish people were accepted into the Ottoman Empire when Palestine was under the Ottoman regime, there were certain legal disabilities against Jewish people even there. But in most of Christendom, in most of Western Europe and Europe as a whole, yes, Jewish people have been the downtrodden and the oppressed, even sometimes here in America. But that still doesn't equate to the same type of racism and the same type of experience that Whoopi Goldberg was talking about in her experience as a black woman, in which race is interpreted as something completely different. You got to remember, guys, that racism in this country was equated with skin color, whereas in Europe it was more so equated with religion, because European culture was founded on a religious basis. The old name during the Middle Ages of Europe was Christendom, so it was founded as a Christian society, not a Judeo-Christian society, which is a completely arbitrary term that Ben Shapiro is fond of using, but a Christian society. So anybody outside of that framework was oppressed and marginalized, and that includes Jewish people as well as Muslims. In fact, some would even suggest that Europe didn't even begin to acquire a religious identity until after 732, when Charles Martel expelled the Moors during the Battle of Poitiers. So, as soon as the Christian French began to assert their identity, which was grounded and rooted in Christianity, they began to fight back against the Moors and, of course, began to oppress other Muslims as well as Jews living in their society. America, in contrast, doesn't have that kind of explicit religious identity and doesn't even have a state religion. But what it does have is an explicit identity grounded in whiteness. That's true because the first enemy, quote unquote, in American history, the first adversary, if you will, in American history, was a visible racial minority in the American Indians. So it was us against them, us being the English colonists that were defined by race, not by religion. So religion didn't even factor in because many of the early colonists were of different religions even then. You had Sephardic Jews, you had Ashkenazic Jews, you had German Lutherans, and you had English Anglicans as well as Pilgrims. So the main difference between people and the main separator and divider among the people in American society was religion. Race. Whereas in Europe, it was more religion. Religion was the glue that kept the society together and kept outsiders out. Whereas it was more, it was more racially based, and the racism among people was based on visual characteristics, whereas the racism in European society was more based on culture and religious ideology. Just like among other classical societies that weren't European, you were defined by the God you worshiped and the way you worshiped him. In most pre modern societies, like in Europe and the Middle East. For example, in the Middle East, they didn't go by what a person looked like, you know, as defining the differences among races. They went by what you believed in. You had Jewish people, Christian people, and Muslim people. You didn't have white people, black people, Asian people. The categories were different. So Whoopi Goldberg is judging you from her experience as a black woman, what she sees with the modern day and her historical experience as a black woman, and saying that, in her opinion, it wasn't a racial issue, the Holocaust. And it really wasn't a racial issue. It was made into a racial issue, but it really wasn't a racial issue. Not really. Because, again, it's so arbitrary. We can define race as anything. We can define race on the basis of language sometimes, like with Arabs or Hispanics, right? We can define them on the basis of religion if we wanted to. But in the end, we should all love and respect each other. And exactly, Whoopi shouldn't have, despite our differences, and Whoopi should not have walked back walked back her statements despite pressure from ABC. Big dog, I agree with that. Stick to your guns. Stick to the principles of what you're saying. Anyway, guys, thank you for Big Dog and Jason for participating. Big Dog and Lisa for participating. And I think that Whoopi Goldberg was right, and ABC is fucked up for suspending her. And ironically, that is an act of racism, or could be conceived as such. But they did it to save face. They did it to not want to offend the sponsors of the show, The View. But it's a shame on The View you can't even have your own view and opinion, and they haven't done this in the past. Peace. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's hope Big Dog wish comes true. And one day I do get over 1,000K subscribers on this channel. Love you guys. Peace. No doubt. Big Dog, have a good day, man. Bless.